The following is taken from Polybius and the Roman Conquest of Greece, How Hellenic Disunity Gave Rise to Roman Rule by Fustel de Coulanges, available now on Amazon. How can it be, we may ask, that Polybius, the last historian of free Greece, displayed not a trace of regret for the perishing freedom brought by the Roman conquest of his fatherland? That an honest citizen devoted to his country can rejoice in the success of the public enemy, and that this preference is not treason but almost patriotism, is a fact worthy of some attention. Furthermore, if a thorough study of this era shows us that his sentiments reflect those of a large part of his nation, one can hope to find an explanation for the conquest of Greece. For the Roman legions, it must be said, did not do everything. The politics of the Roman Senate did not prepare everything. The Greeks, in truth, were intimately involved in the work of their own subjugation, and it would seem that their sentiments and moral dispositions arguably contributed more than did the strength and skill of their conquerors. As one Roman historian said of Greece, to pierce it was to master it. This should not be understood to mean that Greece, without strength and energy, was easy prey for any conquering force that came along. Livy shows us that it was not without trepidation that the Romans undertook wars against Philip, Perseus, and Antiochus. Greece, demonstrably, was not lacking in vigour. It was richer than Italy, and it still had an abundance of manpower. Polybius claims that the Achaean League alone could field 30 or 40,000 soldiers. Greece still possessed the Aetolian cavalry, the Macedonian phalanx, and the fleets of Rhodes. It had the favourable disposition of its land and its mountains that halted any approaching enemy. It had the respect it inspired and the memory of its ancient glory. This Hellenic race, in which the military spirit was not yet extinguished, was still capable of measuring itself against Rome. Yet Greece, eternally divided, had not the desire, it seems, to do what was within its means. Fragmentation prevailed in ancient Greece, where, long before humans, nature itself had already delineated so many divisions, and where the mountains and the sea had carved it so extensively. Each concentration of people formed a state, each city was sovereign. The municipal spirit was so powerful among the Greek people that it dominated the genius of all its statesmen. Greece had admirable legislators, and modern thinkers have added nothing to their science of balancing powers and ensuring the harmony of the diverse elements of a state. Their legislation, however, was only intended for a city. Even the philosophers themselves, who had ample opportunity to create an ideal republic, limited human association within the confines of city walls. Plato, whose imagination was burdened by the task of governing a large number of people, allowed only 5,000 citizens in his ideal republic. As a consequence, the patriotism of the Greeks hardly extended beyond the limits of the city. Since few individuals had a clear conception of a common homeland, few also felt attached to it and duly devoted themselves to it. All affections and energies were given to the polis, and as such, the political mindset of the Greeks seldom rose above the idea of the city. Corinth did not understand why it had anything in common with Megara, or Argos with Sparta, or Megalopolis with Mantinea. Between two neighbouring cities, it often seemed that only animosity could exist. One of the consequences of this extreme division was an uninterrupted series of bloody wars that never fostered unity. When threatened by powerful empires, it had indeed managed to form several confederations. These attempts, however, made in response to immediate danger, endured no longer than the threat itself. Soon, only those who had an interest in transforming the confederation into an empire remained committed to the alliance. The other cities, which had at one point eagerly formed the confederation, were even more eager to break it, claiming that their freedom was at risk. The spirit of independence rapidly destroyed that which danger and momentary prudence had produced. Greece, always wavering between the need for a central power and the love of autonomy, had never been able to establish either one or secure the other, constantly oscillating between fragmentation and subjugation. What, then, could become of patriotism in such circumstances? Patriotism which should not be confused with the love of one's native soil, is not, like the latter, an instinctive feeling, invincible, imposed by external nature on all generations inhabiting the same land. Patriotism, by contrast, is a more voluntary and changeable sentiment, subject to various conditions. One loves their country, that is to say, their city or nation, if they love its laws, if they love its leaders, if they are attached to its customs. They love it for the education they have received from it, for the noble examples they find within it, for the virtues it teaches. Ultimately, they love it on the condition that they are convinced that they owe their happiness and the peace which they enjoy to it, that it is superior to every other city, that its laws are more just, its decisions more righteous, its glory more resplendent. Patriotism, then, is a blend of gratitude, respect, trust, and pride. But if these sentiments fade away among the citizens due to the vices of institutions, civil war, the mistakes or misfortunes of their rulers, one will toil in vain to rekindle it. By the time of Polybius, how was one to truly love laws that were constantly subject to revolutions, always new and ready to perish, and where one faction was always a victim? The poor accused the laws of their misery, while the rich resented the confiscations that befell them. The two halves of the population were alternately persecuted and persecutors, and a fellow citizen was an enemy whose wealth one coveted or whose insurrection one feared. Each person loved their homeland only as long as their faction reigned, or rather, the homeland was forgotten, and all thoughts, desires, and energies were directed toward this faction. Over time, people lost the sense of duty toward their homeland. The citizen ceased to belong to the city. They left to serve foreigners and shed the blood that they owed to their homeland for anyone willing to pay. Without mentioning Clearchus and his 13,000 soldiers, Iphicrates and Agesilaus in Egypt, or Memnon and his 50,000 Greeks, we see that during Polybius' time, even the Achaeans themselves served under the Egyptians and the Carthaginians. So many Greeks, no longer bound by any love for their city, saw little reason to not seek the alliance and support of foreigners. Everyone handed Greece over to them and asked only for the triumph of their particular faction in return. One can imagine the void that must have been created in the Greek soul by the loss of patriotism. What virtues could be inspired by coveted wealth or ill-gotten riches? What sense of justice could endure in the relationships among citizens accustomed to civil war, in countries where the courts were closed for 20 consecutive years, and where the city, preoccupied with factional struggles, did not have the time to establish justice among the people? According to Polybius, people no longer wanted to marry or care for children born outside of wedlock. They forgot about the family just as they had forgotten about the homeland. The habit of civil war, by destroying peace, ease, security, and trust, always weakens the idea of reciprocal duties in every heart and extinguishes any sense of humanity. One can apply to almost all late Greek states what Polybius said about an Arcadian city, where there was, quote, nothing but reciprocal murders, proscriptions, and pillaging. In this state of mind, clemency was always punished, and trust was a mistake. Again, Polybius informs us that the cultivation of the land, the courts, the care of sacrifices, the religious festivals and ceremonies were all neglected amid these wars. This is because the Greeks have been living in civil war for over 10 generations. It has become the habitual, regular, and normal state of the people. There is almost no aspect of life for individuals or cities that is not connected to this struggle between factions. How then was such a Greece to oppose the growing might of Rome? What worth did independence hold for a divided people when foreign rule promised stability and unity? Who was truly the greater enemy, Rome or his fellow Greek?